is it?
A dream. I was flying. I was a great lammergeier, and I flew, and the moon called me, and I flew towards it, and it swallowed me.
That is not good.
The year is 1837. The Great Trek had been in operation for almost a year. The first phase of the Great Trek had started because the British had taken over the Cape during the wars with Napoleon and had put forward draconian laws which were not suitable to the Dutch way of life. So after great deliberation, 1/4 of the Dutch population in the Cape decided to move inland to unknown territory. The second phase decided to follow, which in many ways is similar to the experience of what happened in America when the people moved from the East Coast to the West Coast in large wagon trains. And our story takes in the family of Dirk Cronje and his brother Johan. On these treks, there were marriages, births, and deaths. And the Cronje family were blessed after 9 months of traveling with the birth of a little girl. Having scaled large mountains and gone through the desert and fought the elements and the native inhabitants, old Dirk Cronje felt that he was getting tired of this continuous travel. And after he had scaled this last mountain, he would consider putting down his roots. They eventually got to the top of a mountain and started the descent into what was then Zululand. Dirk Cronje contemplates the future after they had scaled the summit of the last mountain range. It had been an extremely difficult and hazardous ascent. The wheels had to be taken off. The wagon had to be literally hauled up by ropes. And now at last they had got to the top. And beneath was a magnificent valley. And here Cronje was thinking, well, at last we have arrived of what could be called his promised land. He went to the wagon master, De Lange, and told De Lange of his decision that he and his family were breaking away from the main wagon train and setting north towards the Drakensberg Mountains. De Lange was upset and said he didn't think it was a very good idea. However, Dirk Cronje was adamant. With Dirk Cronje, there were a number of other families that felt the same as he did and decided to join Cronje and move towards the Drakensberg Mountains and leave the main wagon train. After traveling for most of the morning and most of the afternoon, the Cronje family and the rest of the wagons decided to make a stop for the night. And in historic fashion, they formed a circle for security reasons and put all the livestock in the center. Cronje's 2 sons were sent out to find the evening meal in the form of antelope. In the meantime, the women busied themselves by preparing the ovens. The ovens were dead anthills, which in many cases were over 6 feet high. The base of the anthill was scooped out, and in so doing formed an oven that developed convection heat, and that was the way that they made bread. It was during this time that the 2 boys suddenly returned post-haste, galloping, followed by wild cries from Zulu warriors. The Zulu warriors chased the 2 boys into the encampment and attacked with great ferocity. The 2 sons were the first to be killed. Dirk Cronje's wife first thought was immediately the baby. She ran to the wagon and slipped the baby some brandy, then scooped her up and put her inside the prepared oven. As she completed covering the baby, an assegai was thrust into her chest, and she died instantly. The rest of the wagon train were all killed. The Zulus were not interested in anything but the livestock, which they drove away in triumph. And there was silence. Sitting on top of a mountain, some distance away, watching this surreal episode take place beneath them, were two bushmen, Guam and Sonso. There was nothing they could do except watch in awe and wait. As the sun rose, the bushmen decided it was safe to move down the mountain towards the wagons. As they were making their descent, there was a movement inside the circle of wagons, and it was one of Dirk Cronje's African helpers. He was the one that guided the oxen with his long whip. He had been wounded, but had laid still, knowing that if he had moved, the Zulus would kill him. He decided that it was safe and moved away before the bushmen came into the camp. When the bushmen arrived, they scavenged here and there and were amazed at the carnage, because basically they are very peace-loving people and are horrified by this unnecessary, wanton devastation that they saw around them. As they were moving from wagon to wagon, they heard a strange sound. Almost sounded like a cat. They followed it to the base of the anthill. Guam moved away the grass, and there he saw for the first time a white baby. He scooped the baby up in his arms, and as he looked at her, the sun started to fade and got darker and darker and darker. And it was the beginning of a total eclipse of the sun, which the two bushmen had never seen before. They felt that the moon was eating the sun, and that this was some form of sign. This baby was some form of sign, and had been sent down by the moon to earth. And he looked at the baby and decided that this was the moon goddess. Guam decided that it was not possible to leave the baby there. He strapped her on his back and took her up into the Drakensberg Mountains to his clan, where his wife took the baby and nurtured it. The young moon goddess started to grow into a fine young girl, and she was trained in the bushman ways, not only as far as woman's work is concerned, but also because Guam felt that she was special. He taught her what men normally do and what young boys do: hunt and to survive. The rest of the wagon train had moved on and eventually had set up a town and farms around the town. There was an English family that had a farm, and it was the Spear family, and they had a son. His name was Robert, and on one occasion he had gone out with his father to find and make sure that the cattle were all together, because there had been a great deal of rustling going on, either by Bushmen or by Zulus, because the game was becoming less and less and less. And on this occasion, when they were out, Robert and his father saw a cow moving away from the herd, which was most strange. Father Spear moved around and noticed that there was a bushman hanging on to the side, guiding the cow away from the herd. Father Spear picked up his gun and was about to shoot when Robert said, "Please, Daddy, don't shoot," and nudged his arm. The rifle went off and caught the bushman in the leg, who fell to the ground instantly. Mr. Spear went along, pointed the gun at the bushman's head and was about to finish him off when Robert pleaded, saying, "Please, Daddy, why don't we just take him back to the house and see if we can't repair his leg?" So to appease the boy, the father picked the bushman up, put him in the back of the wagon, and took him back to the house. The bushman stayed for 17 years and became Robert's mentor. He taught Robert all the bushman ways, how to hunt, the language, how to survive in the bush, and he became more of a father to Robert than his own father. For 17 years that Sensi was with Robert, he taught him many, many things. And on his deathbed, he beckoned to Robert to come closer and took off a talisman around his neck and gave it to Robert and told him the story of this white girl that was brought up by his clan in the Drakensberg Mountains. And he asked Robert to take the talisman into the mountains to his clan and try and find the moon goddess. And with that, Sensi died. Robert was not sure now whether the story was true or just folklore, but he had to find out for himself. Against his father's wishes, he sneaked out the following morning after Sensi's death and headed for the Drakensbergs. It took him 3 days of searching for this elusive white girl, and he was nearly at an end thinking, well, it was just one of Sensi's stories, when he came across her. There she was, sunbathing next to a pool, naked. She seemed to sense that there was someone there, even though he was hiding behind a rock. But Sebi, her faithful little dog, picked up the scent and looked directly at Robert. Robert makes his way down to the girl. The dog growls. The girl is startled. It is the first time that she's seen a white person, and yet she felt something strange, and she couldn't understand what it was. She wasn't scared, she was just sort of mystified and in awe of this blonde young man. And then she saw the talisman around his neck and recognized it as being from her clan. Nongwatsi, the moon goddess, takes Robert to her family, and there she introduces him. And it's only the fact that Robert has this talisman that he is accepted into the clan. In the meantime, the Zulus, who had been finding it very difficult to survive because of the white settlers and because of the Bushmen, had decided that it was time that they finish the Bushmen once and for all. So they amassed the impis, which is 200 men, at the bottom of the mountain, and there they prepared to attack. Looking down at the gathering, the Bushmen became fearful, and it was Guam who developed a plan, and that plan was if they moved great boulders to the edge of the cliff on top of the mountain and rolled them down, maybe that way they could impede the advance of the Zulu warriors. Bushmen are small in stature, but have great guile, and with their poison arrows are extremely formidable. The Zulus, on the other hand, are strong, tall, proud, and fought close-hand combat with their short assegais. The clan busied themselves with Guam's plan. They collected gigantic boulders and moved them towards the precipice of the mountain. Meanwhile, one of the Bushmen had been sent down to capture a large hadida bird and secure it to be held until a time, a signal could be given and the bird released. And so the preparations were complete. The gods seemed to be pleased because what had developed was rain and a great mist. And the Zulus at the bottom of the mountain had great difficulty to see more than 10 yards in front of them. Nevertheless, they decided that there was only one way to go, and that was up no matter what the weather may be. And so they decided to ascend en masse and moved up the mountain. As they passed, the bushman released the bird, and it made its haunting laughter sound. And with that, the whole clan on top of the mountain, including Robert and the moon goddess, started to push the boulders. And eventually the boulders moved over the precipice and then down, down, down into the valley. And as it did so, it developed an avalanche of continuous rocks which devastated the Zulu warriors that were coming up. The Zulus dispersed from this avalanche, but managed to regroup at the bottom of the valley. And out of the 200 men that started, 50 remained unhurt. And with that, they moved up, this time at a faster speed. They managed to get to the top, and hand-to-hand combat took place. And after a tremendous fight, the bushmen, even though many of them were killed, they managed to survive and beat off the remaining Zulus. It was after this period that a great bond, friendship, and love developed between Robert and the moon goddess. During this time, Johan Cronje put two and two together that this could have been his niece that he had thought died some 17 years earlier. So he immediately decided to go and look, and he mounted a posse, and off they went into the Drakensberg Mountains to search for his niece. It wasn't long before he found the encampment of the bushmen, and a great fight took place, during which many of the bushmen were killed, including women and children. Johan sees in the distance two figures, and he makes his way towards them, slowly and deliberately, until eventually he is only a few yards away from a bushman and, as he could see, a white girl. He raises his rifle. At the same time, Guam lifts his bow, and they both fire at the same time, the projectiles crossing each other as if in slow motion. Nongwatchi, seeing the bullet coming towards her father, jumps in front of him and collects the total impact of the bullet. At the same time, Guam's arrow hits Johan Cronje in the throat. Robert did not arrive in time. He could only see the tragic events that were taking place and was unable to stop the inevitable end. Guam looks down at his beloved moon goddess and sees that she is dead. He picks her up in his arms, turns, and jumps off the cliff into the mist. Sebi, her little dog, follows his mistress into the mist.
Do